All right, geometry. So we're talking part 2 of our postulates notes. So we already did all this stuff. If you're a little behind, you need to go back to part 1 and watch that. Okay. So for substitution, we are going with these two examples, angles and segments. So substitution is basically when something is equal to something else, you can replace it. Okay, so replace what something equals or is congruent to. Okay, so in this case, if you look at our examples, we have 7 equals 9. Well, if 7 equals 9, can't I replace 7 with 9? That's substitution. So I replace it or substitute 9 for 7. So angle 9 is congruent to angle 3. That's substitution. And in the same way, LM is congruent to XY. PQ is congruent to XY. So if LM and XY are the same, can't I replace XY? Or sorry, hold on a second. Can't I replace XY with LM? They're the same, so replace it. PQ is congruent to LM. Okay, so transitive is very similar to substitution, except it's more talking about where those things are. So if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Okay, so basically what we're saying is if the first one equals the second one, and the second one equals the third one, then A equals the third one. Or if the first equals the third one. Okay, so in this case, if 7 is congruent to 2, if 7 is congruent to 2, and 2 is congruent to 3, aren't those also congruent? So first is congruent to the third. So 7 is congruent to 3. So same thing with segments. If CM is congruent to XY, and XY is congruent to TQ, then the first CM is congruent to TQ as well. That's transitive, okay? Substitution and transitive are very, very similar, and a lot of the time, you know, they're basically the same thing, so it's not really going to matter which one you pick, okay? So now we're talking about reflexive. So reflexive postulates just means that anything is congruent to itself. Anything is congruent to itself, which sounds silly, I know. Sounds kind of obvious, I know. But we need the reflexive property in order to figure out that certain other things are congruent, okay? So in this case, look at our given. FBS is this angle here, is congruent to RBW, this angle here. So look at how they overlap, okay? So in this case, what we want to keep in mind for reflexive is it is used for overlaps and gaps. Overlaps and gaps. So in this case, we have an overlap. Okay, so whatever that overlap is, we're going to go ahead and use the reflexive property to say angle 6 is congruent to angle 6 itself. Because what we want to do is get rid of it. So if we have an overlap, we want to get rid of it, and now look what we have left. Angle 5 is now congruent to angle 7 because something we've already learned, the subtraction postulate. Okay? So the overlap, that's not a word. All right, overlap is going to equal subtraction. Okay? The overlap means you need to subtract. Okay? So in the same way, here, I've got 5 equal to 7. So here's 5 congruent to 7. Well, look what's between them. 6 is between them. So if we have a gap there, what we can do is extend it out. So 5 extends with 6 to get us B or FBS, and 7 extends with 6 to give us RBW. But we can't say that until we say 6 is congruent to 6, because both of them want to use the same thing. So 6 is congruent to 6 by the reflexive property, or postulate. And then now we can go ahead and put them together and say angle FBS is congruent to angle RBW. And that is by, since we took that and added it on, that is the angle addition postulate. So again, gap means you're adding. Okay? So the same exact thing happens for segments. So look at what we have for this one. It says AI, okay, AI is congruent to EO. Well, again, look at what we have. We have an overlap. So EI is congruent to EI by reflexive. And now that we have that overlap, we can go ahead and subtract it off. Get rid of it. And what we have left is AE is congruent to IO. So that is now segment subtraction postulate. Okay? And then the last one, same thing. We have AE is congruent to IO. Well, look at what we're missing. We have a gap between them. EI congruent to EI. And now that we have that, we can go ahead and combine AI or AE with EI to make AI. So AI congruent to, and then combine the other one, OE or EO, either way. Segment addition postulate, okay? So again, these two concepts right here are what we need to make sure we understand. Anytime there's a gap, we're going to add that gap to it to make those equal. Anytime there's an overlap, we're going to subtract it off to get what's left, okay? And then just a few hints at the bottom here. To use reflexive, you need one given, but two conclusions, because we want reflexive and addition postulate. And then the given segments and angles overlaps or has something between them, which we already said has a gap. Okay? So overlaps and gaps are what we want to make sure we're looking out for when we have these types of problems. Okay? So go ahead and get started on the homework. And again, if you have questions on that, be sure to ask. And again, if you haven't finished your quizzes, check Canvas. Go to Canvas, check your grades, and see if there's any dash marks on anything on there. Everything on Canvas right now should be turned in. If you haven't turned everything in on Canvas, go do that. If you have questions and you're not sure what to do on it, one of the quizzes, ask. We can talk about it. I can help you on those quizzes, but you need to get them done. Peace.